So people ask, well, is our memory capacity infinite? And obviously it's not. The brain is a finite system, and we can only store finite information. So the question is if we approach those limits. And speaking for myself, I certainly feel that I do. Now, the question that you just brought up relates to something called Ribot's law. And if anybody's ever been unfortunate enough to witness somebody with Alzheimer's disease, that heart-wrenching process, they lose their personality, they lose their memories in a reverse order, right? They first forget their most recent friends, and then maybe their grandchildren, and then maybe their children, and then maybe their spouse. So somehow, for some reason, memories get erased backwards. And the question is, why is that? And so the idea there was exactly that. When you have this big blank tabula rasa, maybe your early memories get written down in a very redundant manner in very different parts of your neural circuits. But as we get older and older, one component of why it gets harder to store information is that I don't quite like the term filled up, because it does sound like a disk, and it's certainly not like you have a fixed amount of space. But since the memory is overlaid on top of each other, it gets harder and harder to store new memories, and I think most of us have experienced that. So, I mean, what do you feel? Do you feel that memory is something limited, and has it changed much over are there things that you can pinpoint that I used to be able to do this?
I respond to the overlay thing because I know that the things that you learn, they make the other things look a little bit different. But I do feel that I am learning things in a really different way and remembering them differently and much more vividly than I did before. I mean, I don't know what my first memories were. Well, they were about a lot of things, but they were also about things like different kinds of candy, you know, and
understandable.
Yeah, and in fact, that's the way I kind of like remember my hometown, Chicago. Is like when I walked down one of the streets, I remember where the candy stores were as an adult, and where the trick shops were as well. So, but and those didn't get overlaid. There, I think I agree that they're sort of cartoonish in a way, but I do feel like things that I'm learning now like have a vividness that makes the other things a lot murkier. Yeah. So I would almost say the opposite.
That the more recent memories have a stronger quality.
Are much stronger
or at least the qualia of them, sort of the feeling is, I guess, that adds a certain dimensionality to it. But one of the things that's, I think, particular about memory, and we use the word memory to refer both to very different things, computer memory and human memory, and we should probably have different words for those things, because computers generally store some sort of exact replica or simile of a sound or a sight, and the brain's really not interested in storing exact copies. The brain's interested in storing information, and it distills information, it organizes that information for future use. And what highlights that distinction is that in a computer, there's a very different process between storing information and reading information. So, for example, if you write something down on a DVD, there's one laser to burn the DVD, to burn the little holes in the reflective surface, and another laser that's actually used to read it. So there's no way that recalling will alter what's written down, and human memory is very vulnerable to that interference between where recalling something alters the content. So if there's many studies, for example, if I were to say that when Tim introduced us, I really liked the scarf he was wearing. And maybe tomorrow, if somebody asked, was Tim wearing a scarf? Some people would probably say yes, even though he wasn't. Because in addition, because what I just asked, the act of asking the question, altered it. And this is why we're continuously updating. It's a very powerful feature of the human brain to always update things. So if you see your niece every couple of months, every time you see her, you don't take a new picture in your mind. You're updating that. Those circuits are getting overwritten. And this is a very valuable feature, but it also creates a number of bugs. And this has been a big issue with false eyewitness testimony, in that you suffer a crime and then you witness the assailant, but then when you're looking at the photo lineup, the process of recall is often one of getting overwritten by the people in those photo lineup, and that has caused a number of very notorious cases where people have...
Even in technology, you know, recalling changes the information as well because of dropout, and every time I try to find some information in old files, there's dropout of various kinds, and it tends to happen if it's recalled more often as well. So you know that there are things like that, and in terms of updating, of course, certain kinds of information doesn't translate well into the next phase. So, for example, if you have a record that's been compressed, and this was a way to get a lot more audio information onto a disc, certain aspects of that experience are not there. So, for example, in a recording, let's say you have two guitars in your recording, and you want to make a stereo picture, so you put one guitar at 11 and one at 1. Now, when this is compressed, in terms of making like an MP3, that picture gets squished, and so those guitars move closer and closer to noon until, bing, they have disappeared. So we were asked to go out to Bell Labs at one point and listen to the compression amount that was put on our music, and you hear, and they go, how's that? You're like, that's horrible. That's just the flattest. I mean, and we have gotten used to really flat, terrible sound because because certain storage systems are not capable of recording with any kind of accuracy.
So can you pick up the compression on an MP3? Like if
oh, sure.
Yeah,
of course. I can. It's just well, you would be able to if you heard one piece and then you heard it compressed and recorded, you know, but we're so used to listening to horrible sound as if, you know, as if this system were replicating sound of stereo boxes. When we live in an ocean of sound, things behind us, around us, we're really exquisite listeners, you know, and to have it replicated like that. But I also want to say too, when with this constant duplication of things in new media and stuff, it loses things in each round. So there's not a real one-to-one thing that we're talking about with computer memory. Technology doesn't really work that way with recording because it's always squishing or expanding things in ways that we're not so aware of. And then you have I saw a great YouTube video of some French school kids, and they're sitting there, just 5-year-old kids, and they're evaluating various technologies. So they're being given various older forms of technology, and they're looking at them and kind of like, you know, like Game Boy things and floppy disks, technology from the 70s and 80s, and they're going, what? You know, just with the most arrogant French sort of, you know, then they get very bored, they try to pry it open, no, and then these are our curators, right? These are the ones who are taking care of our precious information that we're storing so carefully for them so that they can, you know, and pretty much they're going to take care of our information as well as we're taking care of our, you know, the people we're supposedly curating. How often are you really worried about how you're going to care for the information of our ancestors? You know, whisk, you know. You know, it's not, you know, so you have to, when you think of preservation and memory and techniques, you know, it's often not this perfect karma line. You know, it's...
And the museum of the future, instead of having the beautiful art that we have in the walls here, it will be, I guess, a couple of floppy disks that people have to look under to see if they're ones and zeros.
And they won't play.
But they won't play. But the compression point is a good one. Things get distorted, but still the updating process And a record is a good idea, right? Because in a way, the old-fashioned LPs, the recall is altering the medium, right? But nowadays with the DVD or when you're looking at a flash drive, it's still the recall at best will distort something. It doesn't naturally update it. I think an analogy with the rainwaters running through a canyon is helpful, right? Because as the rainwaters run, in a way, they're recalling the past waters by going through the specific grooves or tracks. But not only are they recalling the past, they're also storing new information by further digging those grooves. And I think that it is distinct with our human memory that we're always updating what we store. And in the extreme, when people ask about, well, what would be the total capacity? And there's this wonderful short story by Borges in which he talks about Funes the Memorious, and it's a hypothetical fictional story about a man with infinite memory capacity. And the trade-off is always that, yes, if we stored everything as is without any compression or analysis or distillation, it would be more or less useless. And this character has this perfect memory of every time he looked at the sky, he would have a perfect memory of the clouds. But not only that, every time he remembered those clouds at night, he would remember remembering the clouds and remembering the clouds. And it was frustrating to him to look at the dog at 12 o'clock and at 12:05 because it changed angles and the sunlight was different and he couldn't recognize the same dog. So, yes.
A writer who is like just really understood memory and how it gets destroyed so well. There's another one, also Borges' story that he sort of shared with Robert Graves because it was sort of one of these stories that migrates, and the story was Alexander the Great wasn't killed at the Battle of Macedon like everybody thinks he was, but that he was captured by a bunch of yellow men and forced to fight in their army as a slave. And then 30 years go by and they realize what an incredible fighter and athlete and warrior he is, and they decide to pay him. So they give him a bag of gold coins, and he opens the bag, and on the coins is his own picture. And he says, this is from the time when I was Alexander the Great. And but I guess if you're a librarian like Borges, you know, you have this sense of stories at time and how they move through and shift, and you become someone else as a reader. You know, that you become the other person, and identity is a lot softer.
Yeah.